Today, we're diving into something that sounds a little dry, but is actually a huge deal. A global rulebook that's trying to change the very DNA of how big companies do business. It's a framework from the OECD that's all about pushing companies to think beyond the bottom line and really look at their impact on people and the planet. I mean, think about it for a second. Your phone, the shirt you're wearing, even your coffee. Their journey to you is this incredibly complicated web that stretches all over the world. And that's really the question this framework forces us to ask. What's the real story, the true cost, hiding behind that price tag? So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the problem, these hidden costs. Then we'll get into a totally new way of thinking about risk. After that, we'll walk through the practical 6-step process companies are supposed to follow, see how they make some really tough choices, and then wrap it all up with why any of this should matter to you and me. All right, so first up, what is the actual problem this whole framework is designed to solve? Well, we're talking about the side of business that you will never, ever see on a balance sheet. The OECD has a name for these things. They call them adverse impacts. And wow, they are serious. We're talking about things like forced labor, child labor, destroying whole ecosystems, bribery, dangerous products. The list goes on. And these aren't just hypotheticals. These are real-world problems pulled straight from the official guidance. And here's the most important part. These aren't just one-off bad apple situations. A lot of the time, these are systemic problems. They're buried like 5 or 6 layers deep in a company's global supply chain, which makes them almost impossible to even see, let alone do anything about. So to tackle a problem that big, you need more than just a new rule. You need a completely different way of thinking. And that's exactly what the OECD is pushing for here. This is a huge shift. Just look at this. For decades, when a company talked about risk, they meant risk to themselves, losing money, damaging their brand. But this framework completely flips that script. Now, the focus is on the risk the company poses to the world, to people, to communities, to the environment. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The guidance itself says it plain as day. It's an outward-facing approach. It's about looking out at your impact, not just inward at your profits. And honestly, that one idea changes everything. So the tool for managing this new kind of risk is called due diligence. And the absolute best way to think about it is like a regular preventative health checkup, but for a company's ethics. The point isn't to wait for a disaster to happen and then clean up the mess. It's to be proactive, to constantly look for problems and fix them before they can cause real harm. Okay, so that's the big idea, but how does a company actually do that? Let's get into the nuts and bolts, the how-to of all this. This is the engine of the whole framework, a 6-step cycle. And that word cycle is so important. This is not a checklist you do once and forget about. It's a constant loop. It starts with making this way of thinking part of your company's actual policies. Then you go out and find the risks. Then you act on them. You track to see if what you're doing is working. You tell people what you're doing. And crucially, if harm has already happened, you help fix it. Right, but let's be realistic. If you're a giant global company with thousands of suppliers all over the world, that second step, identify risks, can feel completely overwhelming. I mean, it's like trying to boil the ocean. Where on earth do you even start? Well, the guidance is actually pretty smart about this. It says you don't try to check every single thing at once. You start by looking for hotspots. You map out the high-risk areas. For example, are you in an industry like fashion that historically has had labor issues? Are you sourcing materials from a conflict zone? Does making your product, like electronics, create its own risks? That's how you begin to zero in on where the biggest problems are likely to be. So, once you've found a risk, you move to step 3. You do something about it. And the first rule is incredibly simple, but also really powerful. Before you do anything else, you have to stop the harm that you yourself are causing or contributing to. Clean up your own house first. But here's where it gets tricky. What if the problem isn't in your factory? What if it's happening at a supplier you work with? Or even a supplier's supplier halfway across the world? You're not causing it directly, but your business is still connected to it. What then? This is where a key idea called leverage comes into play. The guidance says you have to use your influence as a buyer. That could mean using your contracts to demand changes, or teaming up with other companies to create industry-wide pressure. It could even mean helping your supplier get better. And if they just refuse to change, well, as a last resort, you have to be willing to walk away and cut tie. So there's a process.
But even with a clear process, no company can fix every single problem at the same time. And that means they have to make some really, really tough choices. I mean, just imagine you're that massive company again. You do your homework and you find hundreds of potential issues scattered all across your supply chain. It's just not realistic to tackle all of them at once. So, what gets fixed first? How do you possibly decide? The answer is all about one thing: severity. You don't prioritize based on what's cheapest to fix or what's best for your PR. You prioritize based on how severe the harm is. And severity is defined by a few things. How bad is the harm? How many people does it affect? And is it something that can ever be undone? And the rule here is absolute. The most severe problems get dealt with first. Period. End of story. The guidance is crystal clear that when it comes to human rights, you address the most severe risks first, no matter what. Okay, so we've gone through the problem, the big shift in thinking, the 6-step process, and the tough choices. But now let's zoom all the way out. Why should any of us really care about some corporate guideline from the OECD?
Well, this all matters because it's an attempt to rewire the global economy. It gives workers and communities a benchmark they can use to hold companies accountable. It pushes for transparency in supply chains that have been hidden for way too long. And maybe most importantly, it shifts the whole idea of responsibility away from, oops, we didn't know, and towards it's our job to find out and to act. When you get right down to it, this is really about accepting just how interconnected our world has become. What a company does in one corner of the globe can have massive consequences for people and ecosystems on the complete other side. This framework is a blueprint for trying to manage that incredible complexity in a more responsible, more human way.
So, the rulebook has been written. The plan is there. But, a framework is just paper. It's only as powerful as its implementation. And that leaves us with the big final question we all have to think about. Who is actually going to make sure the companies play by these new rules?